Welcome back to Blockchain of Raw. I hope you're all doing great out there. Today we've got some powerful news to break down because Ripple and the Central Bank of Singapore are making serious moves that could reshape the XRP ecosystem forever. I'm talking about the public chain XRPL and the fact that trillions, yes, trillions could soon be flowing into it. But before we dive deep into that, we've got to address the short-term noise because the market just saw a small 5% pullback after those inflation numbers came in hotter than expected, up around 3.3%. Now, here's what's funny. Every time inflation data comes out a little high, the same panic hits the market. You'll see a flood of people complaining in the comments, calling it manipulation or claiming crypto's over. But this is just volatility, something we've seen time and time again. The market gets spooked for a day or two, traders overlever, positions get liquidated, and then we move right back into accumulation. That's exactly what's happening right now. In fact, just in the last 24 hours, over 100 million got wiped out in liquidations across the crypto market. That's not bearish, and that's a reset. When you zoom out, this is exactly the kind of shakeout we've seen before every major run. People forget that volatility isn't the enemy, it's the setup. This kind of short-term drop has historically preceded massive upside once the market digests new macro data. And let's be real, anyone who's been here for more than a couple months knows XRP doesn't follow the crowd for long. When institutions step in, it moves differently. And that's exactly what's brewing behind the scenes with this Singapore partnership. Because while everyone's distracted by inflation headlines, the real story is the infrastructure being built. That's why this video matters, because Ripple isn't just focusing on private bank networks anymore. We're talking about the public XRPL, the one regular investors can actually interact with, the one that's being recognized by a central bank as a legitimate infrastructure layer for tokenized assets. So when people panic over a few red candles, they're missing the big picture. The groundwork for trillion-dollar inflows is being laid right now, and make no mistake, the smart money already knows it. They're using volatility as their entry point while retail panics out. If you've been following XRP since the early days, you already know this pattern. Market panic, short-term correction, and then silent accumulation by institutions who see what's coming before anyone else. That's why I keep saying this isn't the time to freak out. It's the time to pay attention. So let's get into what the Central Bank of Singapore actually said, but because this isn't some vague crypto partnership announcement, this is Project Guardian, a major institutional initiative backed by the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And guess what? The public XRPPL is part of it. That's right. Not just Ripple's private network for banks, but the open public ledger that you and I can access. Now, this is huge because for years, people kept saying the private side of Ripplet would handle all the institutional use cases while the public side wouldn't matter. That narrative just got destroyed. The central bank literally highlighted public blockchains like the XRPL as the next step for regulated tokenization and cross-border settlement. Let me read you the essence of it, and they talked about technologies that address compliance and security challenges, helping institutions adopt these networks more confidently. That's a big deal because the biggest barrier for traditional finance has always been compliance and AML. But now the XRPL includes features that make these processes easier, verifying counterparties, reversing fraudulent transactions, managing secure digital identities. That's regulatory language, that's central bank talk, and if you've ever studied how governments adopt technology, this is the phase right before large-scale testing and institutional integration. But let's zoom out. Why does this matter for XRP holders? Because every single transaction, every single cross-chain transfer that happens on the public XRPPL uses XRP as the bridge asset. That means real demand, not hype. We're not talking speculation here. This is infrastructure. Ripple's been setting this up for years, quietly aligning with financial institutions, and now the central banks are validating that work. The tokenization of real-world assets, bonds, securities, commodities, even real estate is all moving to public chains, and the XRPL is positioned at the front of that shift. And here's where it gets crazy. Singapore's report mentioned interoperability, meaning the ability for these networks to connect across systems. That's exactly what XRP was built for. The XRPPL is already fast, energy efficient, and scalable. When you add interoperability and regulatory confidence, you get a perfect storm for mass adoption. While most retail traders are obsessed with meme coins or temporary pumps, the real value is being built here where institutions can finally operate at scale using blockchain without fear of compliance issues. That's why I keep saying XRP isn't a retail token anymore. It's becoming a financial backbone, and that's what's going to drive the next trillion-dollar wave. Now, this is where it gets interesting because what's happening in Singapore isn't an isolated event. It's part of a global alignment that's quietly building the foundation for XRP's next phase. Let's talk about Japan for a second. Ripple has some of the deepest roots there long before this current wave of hype. We're talking about partnerships that go back years with SBI Holdings, one of the largest financial groups in Japan, a company that's literally embedded into Ripple's ecosystem. And just recently, SBI Holdings made it clear they're not just interested in using Ripple's technology, they're looking at an XRP ETF. Think about that for a second. When Japan, one of the strictest financial regulators on the planet, starts discussing an XRP ETF, that tells you something about how confident institutions are in XRP's regulatory clarity and real-world utility. Now, combine that with Singapore's central bank integrating public blockchain infrastructure like XRPPL for tokenization. What you're seeing is the Asia-Pacific region building a parallel financial network, and XRP is at the center of it. This is not speculative. These are policy-level moves. Countries integrating blockchain at the government and institutional layer. And let's clear up a major point of confusion because I see this everywhere online. People arguing over Ripple's private chain versus the public XRPPL. Like one invalidates the other. It doesn't. That's just noise from people who don't understand how enterprise integration actually works. The private chain handles internal bank operations, controlled high-security environments for specific use cases. The public XRPL, on the other hand, handles open liquidity, interoperability, and real-world value transfer across multiple systems. And here's the key. They're interconnected. David Schwartz, Ripple's CTO, has said this repeatedly. The private chain and public chain aren't competitors, they're bridgeable. Transactions can flow between them. The value that enters the private chain still needs liquidity, and that liquidity source, that's XRP on the public ledger. So when you hear people say the public XRPPL won't be used, they're missing the point. The public chain is where value moves, where institutions will tap into open liquidity pools for settlement. Ripple isn't building two separate worlds. They're building one ecosystem with multiple access points, and both sides rely on XRP. This is why tokenization and interoperability are the two biggest themes you'll keep hearing this year. Central banks like Singapore's aren't experimenting for fun. They're preparing for trillions in real-world assets to move on-chain. And the XRPL is being cited as a model network because it already solves the biggest technical problems: speed, cost, security, and regulation. And now, with Japan and Singapore both tied to Ripple through real banking relationships, you can see how this web is expanding. Every new partnership, every project like Project Guardian is another signal that we're heading into an era where XRP's utility becomes unavoidable. Let's talk about the numbers now because this is where everything comes together. The Central Bank of Singapore recently referenced a figure that caught everyone's attention: $19 trillion. That's the estimated value of assets expected to be tokenized on public blockchains over the next few years. Let that sink in for a second. Trillions, not billions. And within that massive shift, the XRP ledger is directly mentioned as one of the public networks ready to handle institutional-grade tokenization. Now, if you've been watching the macro landscape, you know what's happening. Inflation is sticky. The traditional financial system is creaking, and institutions are desperate for faster, more transparent settlement rails. The legacy systems can't handle tokenized assets, but XRP's public ledger can. And that's exactly why central banks and major financial players are aligning with Ripple right now. Look at what's unfolding. The Ripple versus SEC case is done. Regulatory clarity has been achieved, and Ripple is free to expand globally. ETF filings for XRP are quietly being prepared in the background, especially across Asia and Europe, where the regulatory environments are friendlier and clearer than in the US. It's the perfect setup for a liquidity explosion once the first ETFs are approved. I want you to think strategically here. When Bitcoin ETFs launched, institutions poured billions into them almost overnight. That same mechanism applied to XRP would create a massive demand shock. And this time, it's not just retail speculation. We're talking about regulated funds, corporate treasuries, and sovereign institutions allocating capital to a token that actually has utility. That's why the noise about price dips or short-term volatility doesn't matter. Those who understand the long-term fundamentals know that these temporary corrections are just setups for higher accumulation zones. While the impatient traders are panicking over 5% pullbacks, the smart money is quietly positioning for the multi-year wave of tokenized capital inflows, and Ripple knows exactly what's coming. The $500 million investment led by Fortress and Citadel wasn't about hype. It was a signal a $40 billion corporate valuation for Ripple in this market environment tells you institutions aren't betting on hype. They're betting on infrastructure. They see XRP and the XRPPL as the plumbing of the next financial system, real usable compliant digital liquidity. So when the ETFs go live, when tokenized real-world assets start moving across networks, XRP won't be just another altcoin. It'll be the bridge asset for institutional finance. And whether you've been holding for years or you're just getting in, that's where the asymmetric upside lies. The shift from speculation to utility is happening right now. It's not some future dream. It's the present reality unfolding in front of us, but it's slow, quiet, and behind the scenes, which means only the informed ones, the people actually paying attention, will benefit when it all hits the mainstream. Now, before we wrap up, I want to bring it back to the community. Because the reason this channel exists is to keep people informed, sharp, and ahead of the noise. There's a ton of misinformation floating around, and let's be honest, most people only start paying attention when it's already too late. But those of you watching now, you're early. You're seeing this market transition before the mainstream headlines start catching up. So, here's what's coming to the Journey to XRP channel. We've got some serious updates on the way, starting with giveaways. I've partnered with Decent Wallet, one of the best self-custody solutions I personally use. They reached out and offered to send a few wallets completely free, and I'll be passing those out to some of you right here from our community. This isn't sponsored nonsense. This is about getting people off exchanges into self-custody and in control of their assets, because if you don't hold your keys, you don't hold your crypto. Period. On top of that, I'm working on setting up trading challenges and tournaments with a few exchanges that have reached out not for hype, but to actually help people learn how to trade smartly in this volatile environment. If you've been burned by leverage or poor entries, this is where you'll sharpen up. Understand how to protect your capital and take advantage of both the upside and downside moves. Because let's face it, volatility is where money's made if you know what you're doing. Now, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. This is the time to prepare. We're past the lawsuits, past the delays, and the world's financial infrastructure is literally evolving toward the exact solution Ripple has been building for years. The public chain XRPPL is finally getting the global attention it deserves. The institutions are here. The liquidity is coming. And those who kept their conviction through the chaos are the ones who will benefit when this thing fully ignites. But don't just take my word for it. Do your own research, dive into the official documents, read through Project Guardian, understand how tokenization works. When you know what you're holding, the noise disappears and the patience becomes effortless. And as always, a quick disclaimer. Nothing here is financial advice. I'm not here to tell you what to buy or sell. I'm here to share data, insights, and the macro picture so you can make educated decisions for yourself. You are responsible for your own investments. Stay smart, stay skeptical, and keep learning. That's it for today's breakdown, guys. If you got value from this, hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Type XRP in the comments if you're still here. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications because we've got more deep dives coming soon. Until next time, stay focused, stay ready, and remember the journey to XRP is just getting started.